Welcome everyone to the 7th installment of Eat, Drink, Vote. My name is Liz Ruppel and I am the policy organizer at the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. I'll be your host today. So this is the 7th of 9 weekly web discussions that have been happening every Tuesday at noon from now until we get up to Election Day on November 3rd. And as many of you may know, we are an alliance of farmers and eaters who use our choices and our voices to build a more just and regenerative food system. And voting is one of the most important ways that we can use our voice. To help you cast a more informed choice on November 3rd or earlier, we solicited input from our members at our Alliance annual meetings back in February. We interviewed our leaders and we worked with our local and national partners to create the Illinois Food and Farm Candidate Questionnaire, which has 9 of the most pressing issues facing farmers and eaters all across Illinois. We sent this questionnaire to 50 candidates running for congressional House and Senate seats in every district and asked how they would respond to issues from food security and corporate control to racial equity, and today's topic, climate change. So we turned those responses into the Illinois Food and Farm Voter Guide, which is available on our website. And we'll make sure that gets posted in the chat. But before we really get into our discussion today and meet our panel, I do want to recognize the original caretakers of this land that we are on. Given many of you are tuning in from across Illinois, if you are able to, I ask you to open up the native land map that we will also link in the chat. Find your location and look at the communities that once cared for the unceded land on which we reside today. I ask you to critically think about a few pieces in this moment. This map is not perfect and it is eternally incomplete, and it may leave out or misrepresent Indigenous people and the intricacies of their territories. Also, this moment is just that. It is a moment, an acknowledgement. It does not absolve us from the years of complicitness and does not rebuild the lives of Indigenous peoples. These lands that we live and work on are the ancestral homes of Indigenous peoples that were forcibly removed, executed, and robbed of their land and traditions. And yet, even when faced with the most unthinkable circumstances, they are still here and they are thriving. So I ask you to join me in this time as an opportunity to consider the ways that you can stand in solidarity with Indigenous people and take action in your community. Thank you for listening to that acknowledgement. So we can get started. We ask candidates for this topic what steps they will propose to assist farmers in becoming part of the solution to climate change. Many farmers and organizations, the Alliance included, have been focusing more and more on regenerative solutions on the farm and how they benefit our climate. We are inspired and energized that one of the solutions is literally beneath our feet. Soil's ability to lock in carbon has been studied more extensively, and the regenerative agriculture movement is spreading. Even more so on the big screen, you can check out Kiss the Ground on Netflix, which features one of our buddies, Ray Archuleta. But we're not the only ones that are excited. So I want to welcome our wonderful panelists of farmers and experts. Let's meet Mallory Krieger. She's a farmer in the Champaign area and director of Terra Alosa. Tara Ritter, Senior Program Associate for Climate and Rural Communities at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Hi, Tara. Steve Buxton, owner and operator of 2 Mile Creek Organic Farm in Sullivan and co-chair of the Alliance Soil Health Caucus. And Chris Reynolds, who farms in Nokomis and is the Midwest Director of the American Farmland Trust. Welcome, everyone. Before we take a look at those responses from candidates, I want to turn it over to our experts to help us really unpack this question and better understand how farmers and farming can be a climate change solution and what they think should be done at a federal level. But let's kick things off with some introductions. Can you all tell us a little bit about you, about your farm or your organization, and a little brief overview of how you're focusing on climate change? Mallory, I'll kick it over to you first.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mallory Krieger. I am an independent contractor who works with the Organic Agronomy Training Service, also called OATS, in the capacity as National Program Director. And I also work with the Pasture Project to help them with organizing around regenerative grazing in Illinois. In addition to that, nonprofit focused work and ag education focused work, I operate and own a farm in Western Illinois in Pike County, where for 5 years I grew fruits and vegetables and sold at farmers markets and through CSA, and have since entered the process of transitioning the farm toward regenerative grazing. So my goal is that come next spring, I will have my first cattle herd. I'm working on infrastructure investments and getting the pasture quality up in anticipation of my first herd.
Excellent. Exciting news. Thank you. And Tara?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tara Ritter. I work at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Based in Minneapolis. IATP works locally, nationally, and internationally on ag and trade issues. We were founded in the mid-'80s during the farm crisis to advocate for policies that would keep small and mid-sized family farmers on the land, and really work to push back against the model of consolidation and of overproduction. I've been at IATP for a little over 7 years now, and I work primarily on climate change policy. I focus at both the Minnesota state and the federal levels. And this includes work through the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, which is a little bit of what I'll talk about, and is where it's where I work with the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. Before IATP, I was getting my master's degree at Ohio State, where I studied nutrient management and farmer decision-making around conservation practices. So I'm really excited about that as well. And also just really glad to be here. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Tara. And Steve, and then Chris.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Yeah, Steve Buxton here at Sullivan, Illinois. Lifetime farm boy, grew up on a farm that was established in 1890 by my great-great-grandfather. Still have the house there. Family moved to this area in 1832 from Pennsylvania. So there's a long lifeline. And my ancestors that moved here helped start up farming in the community, was a big part of the agricultural development, as I found out, over the years. But anyway, so I'm also the co-chair now for the Illinois Soil Health Caucus. I work with a lot of different groups, like Mallory has in the past as well. So now on the Kaskaskia Watershed Committee, and we're learning a lot, and a big organic farm. I truly believe in what makes our organic farm successful is soil health. And I mean, we can dive into that much more at other times, but so that is us. As we speak, we're building buildings. We're working with farmers to bring certain types of goats, livestock to the farm so we can close loop the whole thing and make it more of a regenerative system. And so I'm very excited about this. We can't go fast enough. We just don't have enough people. So I'm very excited. I deal with I know it's over 500,000 acres across 3 states, working with farmers and trying to help them become more profitable through this system of things we're talking about. And it's kind of funny because I was with the local director today in Sullivan at the NRCS. We do now, through Mallory and other groups, fundings. It's helped make them aware they need help. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for being here, Steve. I know it's a busy time for everyone, so we appreciate you all. Chris, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Liz, for having me today. As Liz mentioned, I'm a farmer here in Central Illinois, a 5th-generation farmer. Corn and soybean farmer here in Central Illinois. And I've also worked in conservation for all of that time in my past almost 20 years now. I've been with American Farmland Trust for the last 4 years. Currently the Midwest Regional Director, and for those of you who have not heard of American Farmland Trust, you may have heard of our "No Farms, No Food" slogan, and they have one of those stickers somewhere in your office or on your vehicle. But American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit organization whose mission is to promote sound farming practices, help keep farmers on the land, and also to protect farmland. So we just recently celebrated our 40th anniversary as an organization that was founded out of those principles. Most of our work here in Illinois has been around the promoting of sound farming practices, part of our mission. And we've been working in Illinois specifically for the last 5+ years to promote these sound farming practices or conservation cropping systems as part of a way to improve the water quality and to help reach the goals of the nutrient loss reduction strategy. Within the past couple of years, we've started to put more focus on those same practices as we know that they also have the ability to help the climate. So really excited to be part of the conversation today because a lot of what we do comes from the local level. And our organization is, I think, somewhat unique in that we have the ability to work at that local level, also affect state policy, which we'll talk a little bit about later, and also take some of those issues up to the federal level. And as we talk about a new farm bill coming up in a couple of years, and we talk about, existing federal programs that are available to farmers, what changes we could make to some of those programs to make them better for the farmers. So thanks again.
Oh, thank you. Yep, can't wait to dive into all those discussions with you all. So that's what we're here to talk about, how farming and farmers can be a climate change solution. And as I mentioned before, we outlined that question in the voter guide. So if you're following along at home or at the office, you can head over to our website to check out how your candidates responded, if they responded, and if they haven't, you can give them a little nudge. We have some creative ways to do that. Alternative farming systems, including conservation and the focus of soil health, are not usually the dominant model. And in many cases, we rarely see or have heard climate change being tossed around. Agriculture, particularly in Illinois, is largely based on producing commodity crops for export. And these systems that revolve around large amounts of tillage, chemical inputs, and an overall monoculture plan that has little to no diversity. A lot of the opposite farming plans to what these folks have mentioned already on the call. The majority of the over 20 million acres of farmland here in Illinois is dominated by that corn and bean rotation. So we see this food and farm system model across the country, and it focuses more on profit, and it pays a little less attention to the health of our soils and diversification. So Steve, I'm kind of going to throw it over to you. If you can help sort of unpack a little bit more about soil health. We really dug into that topic last week when we discussed runoff and water quality. But for just a brief recap, for those that may not understand the power of soil, can you give a brief overview of how soil can store carbon? I think that'll really help launch us into this discussion.
Man, that's a gigantic conversation that, can go on and on. But to me, it's really simple. And, I had my aha moments per se, I continue to have them. As far as soil health and carbon in the soil and the cycling of carbon, it's really simple. Sunlight makes plants grow. Plants growing extracts carbon out of the atmosphere, sticks it in the ground, and then through different methods, it gets released back out through livestock. I'm going to use the word tillage because, it is a way that it happens, and there's other plants. And so all that, different methods, from the atmosphere through plant life, from sunlight, making plants grow to allow them to extract it out, to stick it back in the ground, and to give it something to adhere to in the soil by having healthier soil. It's that simple. I don't know how else to make it. There's a lot of science behind it and everything else. We can get a lot of big names, but that's the simplicity of it. And when it's firing and working, I'm seeing some astronomical things on our farm. You know, I follow the groups from England on how they study worms and, you know, what's going on in the soil on that. And, you know, people talk about life in the soil. Well, a simple thing is people think 12 worms per square foot is a good thing. It's not uncommon for us to see 20. All right. So things in the soil have to be working.
Right.
Worms are an easy visual, but there's a lot of microorganisms that's there. Hard to see, but man, they are dynamite. They are doing astronomical things for us.
Right. So sorry to interject, but without those living microorganisms in the soil, if there is some tillage being done, lack of diversity, then we see it affects our climate. We see a changing climate, rising average temperature, more extreme heats throughout the year, increase in drought conditions and more flooding events, maybe changes to some crop availability and viability. So that's just a snapshot of maybe some of the effects of climate change. But we do have 3 farmers on the call that are literally the boots on the ground that can kind of go a little deeper and share their stories. So Mallory, Chris, and Steve, have you seen those changes on your farm? What are you experiencing? And you can go a little deeper into what you've seen. Mallory, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, Liz, I guess.
Oh.
Go ahead, Chris. I'll follow you up.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say, you know, I think what we've seen the past few years is that we have fewer available planting days, suitable planting days in the spring. You know, we've seen a decrease in that overall planting window, and that's caused a lot of these corn and soybean farmers to, you know, purchase larger equipment, the ability to get over more acres, you know, in a quicker amount of time. We're also seeing more intense rainfall events and more rainfall events in general. And that is having a big impact on, you know, soil erosion, nutrient loss. As I mentioned before, we've been doing a lot of work in that area. We know that we're not heading in the right direction. Some of that is because of climate change and because of, you know, these large intense rainfall events. You know, I see erosion occurring in places on the farm that we've never seen before. I talked to other farmers who are saying, you know, I've never had this problem, you know, in this field. And so I think farmers are seeing those things. They don't always equate it to climate change. But, you know, the main thing here is that because of this, it's made adopting these conservation practices like cover crops and no-till ever more important. And at the same time, it's also making it a little more challenging to get farmers to adopt those practices. It's made it challenging to manage during these times as well. When you see like 2019, when the planting window was really narrow in the spring and we had a lot of late planting, that shifted harvest back, and that created some problems getting cover crops established in the fall. So we're trying to work through all these things. I think, you know, on my own farm, also in working with other farmers, you know, across the Midwest.
Thanks, Chris. I'd just like to echo a lot of what Chris said, and in the experience I had when I was growing vegetables for market. My first year was 2012, and it was the driest on record in the state of Illinois. And my last year doing market vegetables was 2015, and it was the wettest on record for my portion of the state. And so I saw the ultimate extremes in my short 5 years of growing vegetables. And through that, I realized that there was no way that I could establish myself as a young new farmer and achieve the profitability that I needed to with the amount of risk that I was experiencing with these extreme variations in weather. And so my focus has turned toward how can we use the tools that we have within agriculture to be able to mitigate that risk and to take some of the variability and the extreme, we'll build resiliency into our soil by building soil health through the 5 pillars of soil health, keeping the soil covered, reducing disturbances, keeping living roots in the soil. getting livestock back on the land. So the livestock avenue seems to be one of the best ways to rapidly regenerate soil, to build water holding capacity, to help absorb some of the resiliency build resiliency in the plantings, so absorb water faster. So that's what I'm working toward. I'm trying to help other farmers. We can't change the amount of precipitation that's falling, but we can change the way that our soil and our farm systems respond to it to absorb some of that risk.
Absolutely. Steve, would you like to add?
You know, I'm always good for that, adding. Yeah, great comments, guys. What I'm really excited about, what I'm seeing, is evidence that I'm gonna be a little contradictory to some things out there that I know that's going on. But today, if anybody gets, I guess there's some really good documentation out there that's been published by the University of Notre Dame, the Chateau Project that was done through Indiana and some. If anybody gets to see that, that's like a 9 or 10 year research project they've done every so many days for the last it's been a long time. Last time I knew it was 7, 8 years of documented research of what the effects of cover crops do once they're added into a watershed district. And the most amazing thing that happened in the first 2 years was all the creeks or the streams that they were studying, all of them went back to clear water. Simply said, that meant they eliminated, and that was only 70% of the farms in that district that would allow them to put cover crops back on. Which the proof is that means soil stopped leaving those areas. That meant, and by using cover crops, even though tile was implemented, because there's that controversial statement about adding, the runoff from the farms and the flow from the drains slowed down. So they were actually retaining more water in the soil, like Mallory mentioned. And so the tile didn't affect the farms. It actually kept it with cover crops. And so there's some humongous studies, Kiss the Ground, and some other videos that came out. The one great illustration of how climate change can relate to is the one they illustrated where we should be feeling a cooling from the sun because it's not burning as hot as it used to. But the actual temperature on the earth is increasing due to some of the things that we're doing to it on the earth as humans. Our humanistic things have caused contradictory things to happen. And I'm really excited about it. When you uncover crops and do some of the correct methods, I'm seeing 15 degrees difference between bare ground and grounds that's got cover crops. That's a lot. That goes to affecting some of the rainfall amounts or help managing the loss of, surface rain and stuff like that. There's a lot of dynamics here. Super, super powerful things that we can do. I will say, and I'll stop here, every farm where I've implemented what we've been talking about, what Mallory said and Chris said, all of our farms now take 5 inches of rain in 5 hours. And that's a lot. When my neighbors now, and I'll watch them, they can't take an inch. And that's comparing a not necessarily organic, but a cover crop farm versus a common tillage, normal practice ag operation, which is amazing because you'd think deep tillage would just let that water run right in. It's not the case at all.
Yeah, Steve, that's funny that you mentioned that because that was the video that we used in the last voter guide web series, your cell phone video that you sent over. So if you need a visual, check out that video and you can see Steve's neighbor and the river running off their farm. But so, you all are a part of this somewhat small, but it is a growing group of farmers and organizations that are acknowledging this changing weather and climate and doing something about it. So maybe aside from what you just shared, I would love to know the bigger picture. What drew you to do something about it? Tara, if you'd like to start with this one.
Yeah, I can do that. So as the only person who is not farming on this call, there is a lot that did draw me to the climate change and ag world, especially in the policy side of things. Climate's going to impact every single sector of the economy. It's really hard for me to think of a more important issue. And as someone who, has developed a background in agriculture, I was particularly interested in how ag has the unique ability to be part of the solution to climate change. It's really one of the only sectors that can do that. But, at the same time, like we just heard from everybody, climate change is making it really hard to farm with all of this weather variability. And there's a really big need for ag to adapt to climate impacts as well, to be able to absorb all that rain, for instance. So the cool thing to me is that the practices for both of those things are really the same, that those conservation practices that can sequester carbon are really the same ones that build soil health and that make farms more resilient to this extreme weather. So that interconnectedness really, really drew me to this work. And I think this work has the potential to, help farmers stay in business and to better the environment, to sort of do it all at the same time. So I think that.
Thank you. Mallory, Chris, anyone, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that I felt several years ago when I really started to get into this area, I felt a duty to the future experience that we will have, as well as the experience of future people and future generations, and just realizing how much of an impact the decisions that we are making in this moment have on our children and our grandchildren and even ourselves in our later years. And we have it within our power to make different decisions that will impact our experience over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well said.
Yeah, so I think, for me, it was, really thinking about, initially it was thinking about how I can improve, the land that I farm. How can I make it more resilient, more sustainable? But I think the whole climate perspective that we put on this, it's a much, much bigger picture. As we think about, it's not just about the next generation being able to farm or new generations being able to start, with a new farming career, but it's about, the community, it's about, the country and the world as a whole. And it's the opportunity that's in front of us right now. In Illinois, we have 24 plus million acres of corn and soybeans. We have less than 4% of those acres currently have cover crops. I mean, there's a huge potential there. And, it's right in front of us, and it has to be economical for the farmers. And it has to be, we have to be able to give the farmers the technical assistance and that they need to be able to adopt these practices. We need more Steves out there working with, 500,000 acres. We need a lot more people that have the knowledge and have the ability to work with other farmers to get these practices on the ground.
I'll jump back in real quick here. Our local NRCS has now full-time, thank you, Mallory, and some of the efforts made by organizations where we've been kind of, working with and, communicating with the people that need to hear, the need. Moultrie County is one of the lowest participating percentage by acres in the state as far as cover crops. I found out this morning. I was with the new guy here in Moultrie County's office, and it's kind of, if it wasn't for all the Amish and all their hay ground, that's kind of heartbreaking to hear that, because it does work. I mean, the erosion factor that touches my farms is so unbelievable. They had to bring in leveling tools after they harvested to level out and reconstruct all the ruts. We're talking in hundreds of acres that one farm is now. And the ruts are so bad, they can't hardly cross through the fields anymore. And this is fairly level ground. It's got some slope, but not a lot. And to tell me that that's not an issue is kind of a, it's kind of heartbreaking. I mean, especially when you see it working. Now, some guys think it only works on organic because I'm being organic. That's not true at all. I got guys that are seeing humongous differences now, and it's allowed their economic pocketbook to be better for them. And so it doesn't matter what part of the operation you are, it can work. It can work. It can be for a small farm, to a big farm. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So,
Steve, I think that's a really great segue into kind of the next question about mindsets. So Mallory, just with your experience at the Land Connection, Pasture Project, Idea Farm Network, and Oats, like you are just face to face with farmers all over Illinois. So what do you think might be holding back neighbors, other farmers, landowners that hasn't, that aren't the Steves and the Mallorys and the Chris's?
Yeah.
That question, is that Mallory for Mallory or me?
That's for Mallory. If you'd like to
Okay,
chime in
sorry.
after her, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
You mentioned the word mindset, and I would say there's something to that. The farming community oftentimes is a little slower to change. Conservative mindsets tend to be a benefit when it comes to agriculture, working the land. What worked before is going to keep working. Unfortunately, that's changing, and what worked before isn't necessarily working anymore. And what worked before didn't necessarily work before, but we didn't have complete information to know, but we're seeing the effects. And so there's a lot of social pressure, neighbor on neighbor, comments, scrutiny at the coffee shop, that really plays a factor. But I am starting to see evidence that mindsets are shifting, and it's very uplifting to me. I'm noticing much more positive conversation among farmers about cover crops, particularly. Cover crops are becoming more accepted, not necessarily being implemented at the rate that we'd like to see, but in terms of mindset, acceptance is improving. And that's the first step. We've got to get mindset shifted, and then it comes down to implementation. And that's where we're seeing some more obstacles that we've got to work to overcome. There's a steep learning curve when it comes to changing practices. A lot of guys, they've got the program that they've been using for years, and they've got the team that they've been working with in terms of technical advisors, consultants, seed dealers, chemical dealers, etc. And they've got to find new advisors. That's difficult, and there's not many advisors out there to start leaning on. There's also potentially different equipment that needs to be purchased, and timings are different. So in looking at management of, through the calendar of the year, looking at the management through equipment, those are obstacles that take a lot of time and a lot of thought and a lot of planning to overcome after we've already overcome the hurdle of mindset shift. What it comes down to for a lot of guys is profitability. And as long as what's being recommended doesn't damage profitability, and if even better yet, enhances profitability, that's checked that box. But there's a lot of question among farmers about the profitability and impacts of regenerative practices, because there just isn't a whole lot of really good trusted data that they've seen. So it's on us as organizers, educators, and our research collaborators to provide that profitability information so that we can take that question off the table. And farmers who have undergone a mindset or beginning a mindset shift can start down that path. And I'd like to throw a plug in there for what Chris said earlier about technical assistance. That is a missing link in terms of regenerative practices and implementation. We need more technical assistance available one-on-one for farmers, because farming is incredibly context driven, and that context is really specific. It's field to field, not just farm to farm, county to county.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Mallory. And I think, as I mentioned before, a lot of times it comes down to economics. I do think that the mindset is changing. I mean, certainly farmers are a lot more comfortable with they understand cover crops a little more, even if they haven't tried them yet. They may have seen their neighbor, doing cover crops. They have a lot of questions, very inquisitive about the practice. Last year we set out as part of a conservation innovation grant to produce some soil health economic case studies. We wanted to show other farmers and farm advisors that these farms were profitable, that they weren't just doing it because they wanted to make their soil better, but it was also better for their bottom line. Those soil health economic case studies are on our website, and they're all across the U.S., from California almond growers to dairy farms in New York and corn and soybean farmers here in Illinois. And that's just one way that we've tried to, we go back to field days over the past couple of years, and a lot of times farmers will say, well, just show me the money, show me that this is a profitable practice for me. And even when we do that, we still have challenges, because there are in a lot of cases it's a management. There's some additional management required when you're doing some of these practices. It's a little it's not quite as easy as going out there and doing tillage, and just starting from that. So that's just kind of one way we've been able to provide farmers with that information. Recently, as we started to see more private companies coming out with carbon sequestration programs, we set out to basically compare some of these programs, and we looked at the carbon farming. We produced a carbon farming fact sheet, looking at programs through NORI and through Indigo that are offering farmers opportunities to get paid for sequestering carbon. And there seems to be a lot of confusion out there about these programs. So we wanted to kind of compare these programs. We're hoping to do more than this, but I think the point is that there's going to be other opportunities around climate and carbon's role in the effect of carbon and the climate. So we're really excited about that direction. We know that if there's private industry involved in providing some programs in addition to some of the existing state and federal programs that have opportunities available, that will help hopefully increase the adoption of these practices, and certainly help change the mindset, as you mentioned, Mallory.
I'd love to chime in here as well, kind of from the climate policy perspective, not ag specific necessarily, but for about, I think, like 6.5 years, IATP was working on a project called the Rural Climate Dialogues, and it was an on-the-ground program in rural Minnesota. And I kind of got to go all across the state talking to different folks, sort of from the city and the county perspective, and climate action, I guess, at the local level, and what some of the barriers were there. And I think really fundamentally and understandably, there's a fear of change and a feeling of being really misunderstood by both climate advocates and by policymakers. And that, I was hearing a lot of fears that climate policy could, negatively impact rural areas, that policymakers aren't listening to rural people, and that it might cost a lot of money, impose a lot of regulations, their landscape could change with renewable energy installations, whatever else it might be. And I think, one barrier to different types of climate policy, which is what I work on, is that those fears are real and they're frequently glossed over, like pretty unrecognized by a lot of policymakers and even by a lot of advocacy organizations. And so I think, building more empathy, building a lot more listening in and understanding would help us move some of this work better. And it's something that I've heard throughout Minnesota in some of the work I've been doing.
Thank you for that, Tara. Definitely writing that down. So I think we can pass it back over to you. We've heard right here from the farmers that they are affected and a lot of the stories that you've just shared coming out of more than just Illinois, with your focus at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, or we'll just call it from NSAC from here on out. How urgent is this? I mean, you already told us that climate change affects every component of our economy. And what has NSAC been really doing in the Climate Change Committee to kind of tackle some of these issues?
Yeah, so a couple pieces there on, the urgency and then what NSAC is doing. And I think, what's cool about NSAC is that there's over 100 member organizations across the country, including ITP and including ISA. And the climate impacts are, far ranging. Like even over the past few months, we've heard about the West Coast wildfires and the Iowa derecho, and these extreme weather events have been decimating farms. And so, I mean, bottom line, I would say this is an incredibly urgent issue. And then layer that on top of, facing the worst farm economy since the 80s and the pandemic on top of that, this is a critical time to be working on this. So NSAC is focused on federal policy, like you've said, and there's a big need for ag to be addressed well inside of climate policy. Climate policy is going to be moving forward, plain and simple, and we need the ag portions of that to really benefit farmers. Not just companies, not just agribusiness, but to make sure farmers on the ground are benefiting from whatever climate policy is out there. So bills are coming forward right now, and different people are already chiming in, and sustainable ag advocates need to be at the table too. So we're fighting for stable and predictable support for farmers. And some of that includes through expansions in conservation programs like CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, and EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and different conservation programs that are within the Farm Bill. So we've been working on that. We've been working on several specific bills, including the Agriculture Resilience Act, which would massively increase funding for conservation programs, for research, for different soil health and grazing initiatives. So, advocating on a lot of those bills and trying to get the congressional support to move them forward has been a lot of our work. And then over the past year or two, I'll also mention that farmers and farm organizations put together a farmer climate sign-on letter that was calling on support for farmers in addressing climate change and in implementing practices to adapt. So the outreach on that letter, we ended up gathering over 2,000 signatures from farmers across the country. And a couple months ago, we delivered that letter to members of Congress. So we're hoping that bringing forth all of these farmer voices and pairing that with our, policy advocacy work will help move forward some of these bills and some of this legislation that can support a lot of the conservation practices that folks have been talking about throughout this call.
That's terrific. And yeah, I'm pretty sure all three of you signed on to that letter. So thank you very much for advocating for the sign-on letter. So kind of like back to the state side, I think, Tara, you just listed a lot here with just the different programs that we're working at that our state agencies are doing some farmer training on and trying to get more federal funding towards. But, Chris, I know that you have been a little more active than us in this U.S. Climate Alliance, and our Governor Pritzker, has signed us into this. And he's saying that we must act, that he's really taking this step forward. But what is happening with the U.S. Climate Alliance, and where are we striving? Maybe where are we falling behind? What do we need to do to kind of mobilize?
Yeah, I think we just need to continue to have conversations with agency officials, in the Department of Ag, the IEPA, the Department of Natural Resources, and others that are part of the Working Lands group to focus on, agriculture's role in the climate Alliance. And so, I think there's been a few discussions. I think we want to see more, and we want to have a focus on existing funding to prioritize that funding towards practices that will have the biggest impact on not only water quality, soil health, but also climate. And so, that's the crop insurance premium discount program, the fall covers for spring savings program was one way we kind of started with to, say, hey, look, here's a program that's a very low cost. It couples conservation and risk management. As Mallory mentioned earlier, it's very risky, in the farming community, and even riskier when you have climate change occurring and more intense rainfall events and planting delays and things like that. So, we've had those discussions to show these agency officials and legislators that, hey, here's a practice that can have so many benefits. We know we're working towards this nutrient loss reduction. We know we're trying to just, improve soil health generally, but it also, there's such a huge potential for Illinois to sequester carbon with all our millions of acres of corn and soybean production. And so I think it's having those conversations, showing them the benefits. We have the ability to, to do those calculations, using our CARPE tool, the carbon reduction potential tool, that utilizes Comet Planner, which is an NRCS-based program. We have the potential to say, look, to show our officials that, here's what we can accomplish if we get more funding for these practices, or if we promote these practices more, if we prioritize them more currently with the funding that we do have. It's going to be a real challenge to get increased funding, in the state of Illinois, but we just need to start with prioritizing the funding that we already have and doing better with that funding.
Absolutely.
Can I hop in here real quick?
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, so on that note, funding, and I'm going to say this gently, Illinois has been in a backslide on utilizing through the NRCS and some other programs. They have been backsliding, and they've been giving money away to other states. And I don't mean literally giving it away, but last year it was brought to light that the NRCS division gave away $35 million back to the federal pool that it was gifted from. And when that happens, then it gets moved into another state. So I started to do some investigating on that subject, and we talk about not having funding available, and the state of Illinois has gifted away $150+ million over the last several years in federal funding programs that were supposed to come into Illinois. Since then, I did some other homework and found that other states that are using their money has been given additional funding. And right now, Illinois is probably in the position where they're probably going to have to fight to retain what they had, because they haven't. Now, hopefully that has changed somewhat this year because of some of the alarms that went off. And because if you don't use your funding, they tend to take away funding, and it's harder to fight for. So there's some programs out there, and there's a lot of good groups out here that are trying to get funding for a purpose, but that's not happening. And they do a great job of doing it. But when I hear millions of dollars being taken away, that kind of is an alarm to me. So the states that are doing it and are active around us, they're getting additional funding through the federal programs that are applied.
Right. And, I'll just kind of add to that. That's why I'm really thankful that NRCS has stepped up, and they've created 2 new soil health positions. And one of the specialists created a soil health subcommittee. They'll really be diving into that work with, I know Chris and I are on that subcommittee, and I think we're going to be looking into implementing a new soil health plan in Illinois and focusing a little more on where that funding is going. So I'm happy to be in that place, and then to take feedback from farmers like you, Steve, to the table there, and really figure out what's going on and how we can get more funding. But sort of like a shift with that, maybe just, you know, kind of briefly touch on this, Chris, but sometimes, I mean, federal money is not always easy to come by, especially right now where we are in a pandemic and we are going to see cuts happening to our state budget, our federal budget. So maybe looking at other resources, and with the $5 crop insurance reward program and its tie-ins with crop insurance, maybe looking to federal crop insurance as a way to encourage farmers and landowners to adopt these ag practices. Should we be looking more into those resources?
There is one real quick that I'll mention that is coming out of Iowa. They're paying either $15 or $25 an acre for planting wheat. Now, I know that's not what we call atypical, but wheat is a cover crop, and they're endorsing that abroad, multiple states. So that's another one out there.
Yeah, I think Liz, I think we're going to have this conversation about, how federal and state dollars are being used. Federal crop insurance is already heavily subsidized to farmers through the Farm Bill. It's based on actual production history, or yield of your particular crop. And we just need to know if carbon farming practices like cover crops and like no-till are going to be able to decrease, the amount of crop insurance claims on that property or on that farmland. But also, if we have the ability to provide a discount to farmers who are adopting these practices, that's potentially reducing insurance claims, also making their farms more resilient, better for the climate. Is that alone a better use of conservation funding? So as we think about, shifting dollars or reprioritizing funding, is giving someone $5 off of their, say $20 per acre crop insurance bill, is that a good use of conservation funding? Will that promote an increased usage of cover crops? I think those are the things we're looking at. Illinois and Iowa are both piloting this program. Hopefully the information that we're learning from this program over the past couple of years and the next several years will allow us to have a seat at the table to have a discussion about what changes potentially need made, in the crop insurance provisions of the Farm Bill. So I think we're just really excited about the opportunity, to have Illinois taking part in this program. And it's not for very many acres. We were hopeful that we might get 100,000 acres this year, but due to some budget cuts, we were able to stay with level funding at 50,000 acres. But we had 113,000 acres that applied for the program last year. And so there's a huge demand there. And that was in a very difficult and challenging year in 2019. So I think it's exciting to see that the program that, is the least cost is so popular with farmers. And I think, again, it goes back to that mindset change. 5 years ago, when you mentioned cover crops and crop insurance, farmers got really nervous. They thought that, by doing cover crops, it might somehow affect their crop insurance. And now we see farmers that are doing cover crops instead of crop insurance in some cases. So they found that it's making their land more resilient, and they potentially have a less of a need for crop insurance. So I think there's just a lot of unanswered questions there, and I think we're trying to figure out, we're trying to work through this, through this program.
Thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, definitely finding new ways to bring more funding for conservation practices and carbon smart farming. So really quick, I know we're kind of running out of time. I just want to get to one of the responses in our voter guide. Dana Brzezowski, who's running for the 16th district, has said that we've made a grave error in not relying more heavily on farmers to help innovate regarding solutions to the climate crisis. It's time we corrected it, and policies like this one put farmers squarely at the forefront of solutions to the climate crisis, the consequences of which they've faced for many years. So it's great to see legislators acknowledging the power of farmers in this sector and that there is a current climate crisis going on. I know we've talked about a lot of solutions here. Is there anything left on the table that you would like to see our federal candidates and lawmakers really pay attention to this year and prioritize?
I'd like to see more dollars for technical assistance, and particularly cross-training existing technical assistance providers in regenerative and organic production methods, so that they can start helping the clients that they're already working with adopt more climate-friendly practices.
Great.
I'll add that there are a lot of specific bills on the table that I'm not going to get into right now, but I know NSAC has written a really good roundup blog that, Liz, I think you said
I think we may have already shared it. So we can reshare that, and then folks will know right where to go.
Well, and instead of getting into really specific bills, which, sometimes don't mean a lot to people, I think, at the bottom line of it, we think that congressional candidates should be supporting, stable, predictable public funding for farmers to be, building resilience on their farms. Like Mallory just said, that also needs to be paired with technical assistance. And, like Steve said, even if the funding is there, the states need to be using it. I will say a lot of conservation programs are routinely over-enrolled, and that there isn't enough funding to go around. How that's allocated between states is a different question. But I think, really putting money towards that, predictable, stable public funding is kind of bottom line what we would like to see more of.
Awesome. Any other thoughts from Steve or Chris?
I just want to add to Chris's comment that we talked about a lot of things here, but the economic effects that really kind of can hold back things or be very beneficial is very interesting. And the one thing that Chris said that is so profound to me is if farmers use cover crops, they don't need to use crop insurance, or they're finding they might not need to use. I should say it that way. That is so true. But then you got to really think about the economics of that statement. That means if that takes hold, which would be a great thing, then crop insurance is not being sold. How does that affect the people that sell crop insurance? And, how do they justify, some things that they need to do? Because crop insurance is a big business for the world out there. And so I want them not to have the need, but then we have to also be somewhat understanding why it's there, because, there's a business there and it's a business model and all that. And there's a lot of things built around the economics of ag today because of how we're doing things. And so how do we help those guys out as well? What's going to come into play to balance it back out for, all that mix? So I just want people to understand that that's a very economic teeter-totter that we're talking about when we make change like this. I think it's all for the good, don't get me wrong, but I still have a little bit of feeling that it's going to affect somebody.
Yeah, and I think, Steve, to go along with that, I think we've yet to see how the impacts of climate change will continue to affect, and maybe there will still be an increased amount of risk that we won't be able to overcome with some of these conservation practices. So, I think we've seen some farmers that are basically saying, look, I don't need crop insurance. I think for the majority, probably 90+% of the corn and soybean farmers in the state of Illinois, they're still going to continue to carry that crop insurance. But I think programs like the Fall Covers for Spring Savings programs offers them an opportunity to get a discount for a practice that has huge benefits for them and for the communities and for our watersheds and for the climate.
Thank you. Well, you all have been terrific today. I know we're at 1 o'clock, but it's a question we have to ask because it's important. Why is it important to be a food and farm voter, to go into this election informed, to know where candidates stand on these issues? Why is that important to you?
Well, I think Liz, it's important because the laws and policy that's developed today has such an impact on us for several years to come, and so it's important to know where our elected officials stand. It's important to know. I think it's just as important to help educate them. I think they are they're also looking for this information. There's such a small percentage of the population that's directly involved in farming that it's important that we help educate the legislators, that we show them the benefits of the practices that we're trying to promote.
Yeah, and Liz, like you said at the very start of this, that you're a coalition of farmers and eaters, and I guess that encompasses everybody in the world. If you're not a farmer, you're definitely an eater, and policy is not everything. It doesn't determine all of a farmer's decisions. It's certainly, it's one thing, but it is an important thing, and it can, it can support a lot of the practices we'd like to see, and it can also really get in the way. And so I think, getting it right is critical. And, right now there is an opportunity to vote. And I guess echoing a similar thing you said at the beginning too, that voting right now is a really important thing we can do to make our voice heard, and an easy thing too right now. So that is why I think it is important.
Thank you.
Food and farm issues, they hit us close to home here in Illinois. And, these topics, it's really important to know how our representatives are going to be focusing on it so that we can make the right decision on November 3rd. Or before.
So you have to vote if you want to share your opinion. That's the system we live in. Voting is a right that we've been given. And you have to, do our part if we want to continue to improve. I mean, anything that we can do to help improve Chris's efforts, Mallory's efforts, Tara's efforts, by voting to support the people, and hopefully when they're in place that they will do a good job, because it's important that continues. And I got to share a short story, then I'll stop. So we have 3 watersheds that I reside between. We have the Kaskaskia, the Sangamon, and the Embrough. And they all start near Champaign or in Champaign. But only 2 of them are considered to be a problem. And that's because they draw water off of, and so they get the focus. But all of them reside in the same location. And for us to address why all of them are not a problem, we've got to have people that understand why it's important to be doing the things that we're talking about today. Soil health is part of our life. It does make people healthier. It does make our environment better. I mean, there's a lot of things, adjectives that go to that. So we have to vote to get people in place that can support what we believe in. Please vote.
Excellent answers. I love it. So yes, we are over time, but I just want to thank Mallory, Tara, Chris, and Steve so much for spending your lunch hour with us today and sharing your thoughts and ideas. And it's been a true pleasure to be on this call and to work with you on this. And I want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in today. If you would like to catch another web series, we will be going to our last question, a resilient food system post-COVID, on October 27th with Liz Stelk. She's going to go over that question to really dig into what candidates are going to do to support to ensure a more equitable access to nutritious foods, protect food chain workers, and a more resilient local food supply. So check out our website for the voter guide and send your candidate a nudge if you do not see a response from them. They still have time to answer, and we would like for all of our members, for all of our supporters, for everyone to know where each candidate stands on these issues. This work is powered by you, powered by our members, and if you are not a member, you can become one at the Alliance at ilstewards.org/join. And I encourage you to check out all of these fine folks' websites to learn more about their organizations and to learn more about becoming members with them. Everyone needs our support, so check it out. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you all later. Bye.